Hello and welcome to a special edition of Record Sport Live. My name is Daniel Cott and I'm delighted to be joined by Record Sport's Gavin Berry and Andy Newport. Guys, how are you?
Hi Daniel, how are you, mate?
Good, Daniel, thank you.
There's only one thing on the agenda today, obviously. Gavin, maybe start with yourself. Rangers have sacked Giovanni van Bronckhorst. Maybe not the most shocking news, but what's your take on it?
So not the World Cup? I thought we were going to talk about the World Cup. Well, my take on it is, Daniel, that I think after the 1-1 draw against St Mirren, I think at full time, the reaction of the fans for the second week running, having, booed at McDermott Park after the defeat at St Johnstone, my feeling at full time, much like, I suppose, anyone else who was asked for their opinion then, was that I could not see a scenario where he would be in charge for the next game after the month-long break at home to Hibs on December the 15th. I just thought there's no way. Celtic winning later on that day to go 9 points clear, he just thought there's no chance. Then when the Ibrox board didn't act, in this couple of days after that, you start to wonder, do they have a different view on it? But clearly there was only going to be one outcome, and it just took a bit longer than many thought to arrive at that decision. So absolutely not shocked at all, maybe a little surprised that it took so long. But as I say, I just couldn't see him being in charge for that Hibs game because the fans had turned, and I just don't think, we spoke about it before, Andy, it's very, very rare when you get to a situation like that at Rangers or Celtic where a manager turns it around and it looked as if it had gone beyond that point. And it was always just a question of when he was going to leave.
Andy, it's almost a year to the day since he was appointed. I think it was a year on Friday there. In that year, he's won the Scottish Cup, reached the European final, reached the Champions League. Is he right to feel a little bit hard done to?
Yeah, he's obviously achieved some pretty big things during that 12 months in charge, but I don't think there's any doubt that in some pretty significant aspects have went backwards. You look at league performances, when he took over, they had a sort of commanding lead at the top of the table. He did really well, 8 games unbeaten, I think it was, at the start of his reign, and then obviously COVID comes in. I think he was talking about that last week, about how unfortunate it was that the league season gets the winter break get brought in early because of the surge in COVID cases at that time, and then when they came back, they just froze, as Rangers have made a nasty habit of doing coming out of the winter break. And then this season, it's just been a continuation of that. Obviously, the club were expecting when they won the title under Steven Gerrard that they would go on, and this would be a start of a period of domination of Scottish football, especially given the way Celtic were looking at that point, and it's just not transpired to be like that. Performances in Europe this season have been, obviously, there's been a huge step up in quality they've been facing, but they've just not been anywhere near good enough. And then when you combine it with, to be all but out of the title race before you're, even out in November, it's just not good enough. So, there's been a few big sort of sliding door moments. Had COVID not sort of struck in the way it did, had the league season, the winter break not been brought forward, perhaps, Rangers go to Pittodrie as they were due to do, get a win up there. They face Celtic, they put in a better performance than they managed when they eventually did face in February, and this might all turned out so different. But as things stand, I think even like Europa League, had a couple of penalty kicks went the other way. Then you're looking at Giovanni Bronckhorst being only the fourth man ever to have taken a Scottish club to a European trophy. These wee fine margins went against him, and unfortunately he's paid the price for his job.
It's funny, Andy, to think that only 6 months ago we were sitting together side by side at Seville watching that final. 6 months ago.
It is remarkable.
But do you think had they won? Do you think if they'd won, you're saying it's like a penalty kick away? Because even if you look at last season, surrendering the lead that he inherited from Steven Gerrard, there were still question marks domestically. There were still question marks. Do you think if they'd won that and still been 9 points clear now, that it would have made any difference?
I think it maybe insulates him a wee bit. It's hard. It's a bit like, it's not the same scale, obviously, but you look at, say, Callum Davidson at St Johnstone wins those 2 trophies with them. Then the next season they have a pretty horrendous season, survived by the skin of their teeth, relegation. And I think it was because of what he'd done this previous season, those historic victories, that he was given that period of grace by the board up in Perth. Is it the same? The pressures are a wee bit more intense down here in Glasgow? Would they have survived this kind of season had he won Europa League? I think he might. I think he might have been given more time by the fans. I think the thing that has brought this to a head is, as you said, Gav, is the reaction from the punters. I was at both those draws against St Johnstone. I must say, I was a wee bit more surprised in Paisley. There wasn't more of a reaction. I think everyone just kind of seemed resigned to their fate at that point. Yeah. I think the punters at that point realised there's no way he can go on. They had to make their voices heard in Perth because it'd gone too far for them. They'd had the humiliation in the Champions League. They'd been spanked a couple of times off a Celtic over Gio's time in Ibrox, and to then go to Perth and at that point it was 7 points behind. That was too far. That's when you saw the punters bare their teeth. Obviously, he survived another week, got a result against Hearts, but goes to Paisley again. Another pretty just a nothing display. No sign of style, no sign of fight. No, just a result that basically says this is the end of this manager's time in charge. And I think there wasn't that outcry, that rage at the end of the game. I think everyone just knew time's up. The only surprise has been how long it's taken from the board to actually come to the decision.
I think you tend to find that with fans. They jump up and down when they're really angry, and then they, as you say, they almost then get beyond that point where it's like, they just sort of give up. And that in many ways is worse. When it just ends up being a kind of shrug of the shoulders and there's apathy.
It sounds it's to that point you've written off the season. At that point, when the fans can't even have the anger to the fury within them to jump up and shout, as you say, then you're just looking, well, we've got another 6 months of the season left. Let's just get over and done with. I think the real anger comes when there's something at stake, and I think that pretty sums up the sad state that Rangers are in at the moment. Out of Europe, okay, they've still got both the cups to play for, but in terms of the league, I mean, it's going to take an almighty turnaround in fortunes for Rangers to get back in this title race, especially because the way Celtic are playing. I mean, their form has been remarkable. Is it one defeat in 15-16 this season in terms of the league? So they just don't look like a team that's going to give anything away, and so that makes it all the harder for Rangers to even contemplate getting back into it, because it's not as if Celtic are giving them the wee sniffs of opportunity here and there. There's just nothing at the moment for them.
We did remember have a chat about this last week when in Dick Advocate's sort of final season, remember Celtic were way ahead in the league, and Rangers brought Alex McLeish in round about this time, and although the league was gone, he sort of laid down a marker for the following season, didn't I? Think he won the 2 trophies that were available, the League Cup. Beating Celtic in both, and then they beat them in the Scottish Cup final. So he came in and sort of made a statement, it won't be so easy next year. And that's the thing that Rangers could maybe do now if they can get a manager in, because they're still in the semi-final of the League Cup, against Aberdeen. And if they had just stuck with Giovanni van Bronckhorst, then the likelihood is they would maybe have lost at Hampden, or even if they scraped through that, would they have beaten Celtic in the final if they get past Kilmarnock? Probably not. So it's probably better that they act now. Well, they had to. I don't think there's any choice.
I mean, it's pretty whoever comes in is going to be a daunting task for them, because you look at the state of the squad, and in terms of injuries as well. I mean, we've got no real sign of when any of these guys are going to be coming back. It might be December, it might be January, but you're still got a period, a tough run, especially that game against Celtic just after New Year. Then you've got the contract situation, 5-6 guys out of contract, including Morelos and Kent, although both of them are playing right now. That doesn't seem like to be too great a loss if they both were to leave. You're thinking about, right, what sort of money they're going to have to spend. Obviously, the club have prioritised sort of the repayment of the director loans in the last set of results. It sort of seemed to indicate that. So, is there going to be money to spend? Obviously, they did make a lot of money tail end of last season with Aribo and Calvin Bassey going the Champions League qualification cash coming in. Is a new man going to have that money to put his own stamp in things? And then even with the recruitment, that the club, the sort of list of players that the club's been providing for, managers over the last couple of years, hasn't been great. The signings haven't worked, apart from Antonio Cholak, the guys that come in the summer. Tom Lawrence, he is unfortunate with injury, but the rest of them yet to see any real great statement performances from them that would indicate that these guys are going to be able to drag Rangers back into a title race or offer hope for next season. So a lot of big question marks for the new manager coming in terms of how he deals with it and whether or not he's going to be able to get that reaction, as you say, that Alex McLeish got when he took over back in, when was it, 2002 or something like that?
Yeah. It was such a strange season. I'm just looking back when Van Bronckhorst took over last season. I mean, starts with 4 wins. Then he draws away to Lyon. Okay, I think that was a dead draw. But then another 4 wins, in the league. And then there was a draw up at Pittodrie on the midweek.
Yeah.
Another couple of wins, and then a draw at Ross County. But he didn't actually lose until the Celtic game. But obviously, the manner of that defeat was hugely damaging. But I mean, he'd only had 2 draws in the league in like his first 13 games. I mean, when you look back at that, but just losing those 4 points, it just sort of seemed to. I think maybe the style in some of those games. I think there was a win at Hibs. What they didn't play great, and I think there was just a few doubters there. There was wee seeds of doubt even early on.
It's funny looking back at that period because at the time, the way Rangers played under Steven Gerrard, it was so prescribed, so structured. They had a way of playing it, and they played it every time. There was no plan B. It was just do plan A every time. Yeah. And Van Bronckhorst came in and he took a wee bit of the reins off. He didn't let the. He wanted them a wee bit more direct, get the ball into the front men a wee bit quicker. And everyone was thinking, this is maybe, Gerrard had maybe got a wee bit muddled with time. He burrowed too into his system and his way of playing, and this was just relaxing things. But the longer it's gone on, the more of that structure, the more of that system has come away, and it just looks a bit of a mess. I mean, I'm sitting there at Paisley last week, and you're trying to work out what is it that this team are trying to achieve, what is it, how are they trying to play, and that had gone. And I think that's been perhaps the telltale sign of a team that is lost its way a wee bit. That you're sitting going, you're not sure what is they're actually trying to do when they've got possession of the ball, and maybe that was just the sign that time was up for Gio.
Yeah, I mean, you're saying a daunting task for any manager coming in, and I get that. Obviously, 9 points, it's a huge gap. But I mean, we touched on the Alex McLeish season when he came in. I mean, in many respects as well, it can be a good opportunity for a manager to come in because there's nothing really to lose. People have written off the league anyway. The team can only go one way. There are decent players there. There'll be a clutch of them will come back from injuries. I mean, I don't think
it's a bit like Postecoglou coming in at Celtic. He was in a hiding nothing at that point. I mean, so whoever comes in, I don't think if whoever comes in and it goes wrong, like for example, it went with Postecoglou, obviously different in the sense that Postecoglou came in at the start of the season, but if whoever comes in and it doesn't go right in the second half of the season, I don't think at that point the punters will start getting angry with the new manager. No. It's the board who are the next in line, and that's why the board must get this appointment correct, because they are skating on thin ice with the supporters right now. So many numerous issues we've obviously covered over the last year or so in terms of that upset the fans, Sydney Super Cup, statements aimed at rump supporters. How many Custore kits are we on to now? 15, 16 since that deal came in. Prices for Champions League tickets. So because we want to compete in the Champions League, £180, and yet then first game you get beat, the manager's out saying, "No, we can't compete." So all these things have upset the fans, and then nothing upsets them more than results in the park and performances in the park if they're not up to scratch. And so if this doesn't go right, they're next in the final line. So this is why it's a huge appointment for the Rangers club.
I think it also has to be said, Daniel, that there's no doubt when Giovanni Van Bronckhorst was appointed, it was a popular appointment. I think, obviously because he'd had that spell as a player, and there were not many fans, certainly that I heard, who didn't want him. So I don't think there can be too many complaints about the decision at the time.
Aye, absolutely. Andy, you kind of touched on it there a moment ago, mentioning the board. But one man who is trending on Twitter this afternoon is Ross Wilson. And I know recruitment has been spoken a lot about in the last couple of months. What does the future hold for him, do you think?
As I say, I mean, I think it all kind of rests in this next appointment. This will be the most crucial appointment of his tenure since coming in 2-3 years ago. Obviously, it was always going to be tough appointing somebody to replace Steven Gerrard, given what he'd achieved. The thing that Steven Gerrard got was time. Because his stature, because he's the name, the gravitas he was held in as a footballing figure for his playing days, he did get time that Giovanni Bronckhorst didn't get, nobly so. And obviously it was to do with the way that the state that the club was in when he took over. It felt, given not a free hit with Van Bronckhorst, because there still was a title to win, but it felt like, as Gavin says, an appointment that everyone could get behind. He's obviously a former player, had a track record of success at Feyenoord, especially against the odds. Feyenoord hadn't won a title in 17, 18 years before Van Bronckhorst delivered that. And then, obviously a big name. He's what he'd done as a player, not just at Rangers but elsewhere. So, it was an appointment. It was an easy appointment for the board. I think it was Ross Wilson must have known that this was one that ticked a lot of boxes, and he wasn't going to get too much sort of a backlash for making that appointment. This one, there doesn't seem to be too many obvious sort of candidates in terms of, you see a lot of names bandied about in terms of guys that are going to satisfy the fans, but are also gettable. I mean, that's the mix. It's the sort of problem Celtic had, obviously, last summer when they were going for Eddie Howe, a big name, somebody that's going to placate the supporters, but is he gettable? Eddie Howe then proved not to be gettable. Then they go for Postecoglou, and okay, it's turned out magnificently for Celtic, because he's been an absolute star appointment. He's done tremendously well. Obviously, he's still got a lot of work to do in Europe, but in terms of their domestic performances and the style of play and the way that he's got the fans back on side, it's worked a dream for Celtic. Rangers now need to try and get somebody that can do that, but I'm not sure the Rangers board can afford to have that sort of sticky period at the start like Postecoglou had when he got his feet under the table, because the level of anger that's brewing amongst the supporters is only going to go directed at one way, and it's going to be at them. You saw, at Celtic end, eventually sort of forced out Peter Law, and you just wonder if it goes wrong again, this next appointment will have repercussions for the Rangers board. I think at that point there's going to be a clamour for change at the top of the marble staircase. So I think this is why it is such a crucial appointment for Ross Wilson and the rest of the board. They have to get this right. They can't afford to make another misplaced appointment and then have the anger of the fans directed at them.
Not only getting the manager, Daniel, but listening to Chris Boyd on Sky Sports earlier, he described the next two transfer windows, two of the biggest in Rangers history. It's a crucial period coming up, and it's vital those involved learn from what has happened. Clearly, a dig at the kind of recruitment, which, I mean, the spotlight has been shone on the recruitment for quite a while now. Looking at, remember there was a Champions League game, was it the Napoli game? I can't remember, when there wasn't one single summer signing, and then Van Bronckhorst after it was trying to play that down, but there's no doubt it was significant. They've been unlucky with injuries, yes. Tom Lawrence is one. Had he been fit, would probably have started most of the games. So they have been unlucky with injuries, but there's definitely other signings that haven't really been up to it.
I mean, it's a big couple of years come up for Rangers as well in that sense, Gav, because when you think about it, Celtic are now looking at, I think this is what they are looking at, their 11th title in 12 years.
Yep.
Now, Celtic get 52 league titles. Rangers, the one thing that Rangers have got over their big rivals at the minute is that they'll get this 55. Now, it's looking like it's going to be 53 for Celtic this season. If Rangers make a mess of next year, it's 54 versus 55. Mm-hmm. And then, in terms of, we know what bragging rights are like in this city, and what, one thing that Rangers have been able, Celtic have obviously got their European Cup, and they will, cheer that from the rafters forevermore. The one thing Rangers fans have been able to shout back at them is, well, we've won the league more. Well, it's now getting very close. And if Rangers don't get these transfer windows right and put themselves back in a position where they're competitive in the league and winning titles regularly, then Celtic might just overtake them, and that, no Rangers fan will want to have that sort of thrown at them. So I think Gav's absolutely right. Chris Boyd's right. It's a huge couple of transfer windows coming up.
Gav, Andy, obviously we turn our attention to who could take over. Andy rightly says it's more, a lot of it is about who's gettable. Two of the names that have been mentioned heavily, and it's just purely in social media. One, of course, is Steven Gerrard. The other is Kevin Muscat, who I think he was Ange Postecoglou's assistant. He's won the league at Yokohama. I mean, that would be a box office appointment. That would be very interesting.
Yeah, Gerrard, I just don't see Gerrard returning in all the sort of, you hear Graham Souness was saying on TalkSport today as well, he'd spoken to him and didn't think he'd be up for it. Kenny Dalglish mentioned it in his column a couple of weeks back. These are people who will be talking with a bit of authority on it. Kevin Muscat, former Rangers player, I think, now I'm not saying this would necessarily be right, but I think the fans would probably see it as a step below Postecoglou because he used to be, he worked under him. Now, that's not to say that's necessarily fair, but I think that's how it would be viewed. I think of all the names out there, whether it is realistic or not, I think Sean Dyche would be the top. I think if Rangers could get him, he would be the number one choice. Seeing certainly one set of bookies odds that I'm looking at just now, he's 3-1. Kevin Muscat 4-1, and Michael Beale 6-1. Michael Beale, I mean, there's plenty of love around for him from the Rangers fans. I know he did have that huge role in the Steven Gerrard setup, but I'm not sure. He's still, he's only in his first senior managerial position at QPR, and he had a great start.
Had a bit of a
downturn. I'm just not entirely sure he's got the experience to be the Rangers manager in his own right. Maybe I'm being unfair on him, but I just don't see it. You look at somebody like Sean Dyche, if they thought they could get him, I don't know whether the wages would, whether Rangers could pay him what he would want, what he'd be looking for. But in terms of experience, he's got a bit of steel as well. I mean, I think the dressing room needs somebody that's going to come in and give him a bit of a shake. He's the kind of guy that could do that.
The only thing is, Gav, it's just such an about turn in terms of style. I mean, you always talk about the whole point of having somebody like Ross Wilson, director of football, sporting director, whatever you want to call it, is you want somebody to go in and ensure there's continuity of how the team plays through managers, so that when you appoint somebody, you're not having to bin the entire squad, bring in another whole host of different players. I mean, you saw that with Hearts when they appointed Ian Cathro, then they appointed Craig Levein, and it was just an absolute 180 in terms of the type of player they were having to play with. And
if you think of Sean Dyche at Burnley, but I mean, Burnley in the Premier League, have to maybe play a certain way to get, and also Burnley fans are probably, maybe they're quite a bit like
in that case, but you're basing his appointment on a style of play. Where's the evidence? Where's the evidence that he can play a style of play? He can
play another style.
Where's the evidence of that? So I mean, if he's coming in promising I'm going to start playing, 4-3-3, playing it out for the back, and tiki-taka football, then that becomes a gamble, because we get nothing to base a decision on that he can do that. He's appointing him on the basis that he's going to knock it up to two big front men, and we're back in 1994. So.
The thing is, we only really know him as sort of Burnley man, certainly in recent times, so that's what we associate him with. I mean, if Ross Wilson was talking to us, I suppose he would have to have that conversation and say, could you adapt? You're going to dominate games up here. You're not Burnley up against, the billionaires of Man City. So, could you?
That's why I think Dyche, I mean, as well, I agree with you in terms of personality, having somebody, a big character who's going to go in and make demands of players and really drag standards up. Because I think, that's the thing that will be frustrating a lot of Rangers fans. Standards that were set, that were supposed to be the absolute, the minimum of slipped. And it needs somebody to go in there. I mean, you look at Morelos. I mean, how has Morelos been able to drop so far in terms of his professionalism? If you've got a real leader in that dressing room, I think you sit him down and you lay it straight to him. Buck up your ideas, or you're gone. You certainly don't bring. Obviously Van Bronckhorst dropped him before the PSV games, but 2 weeks later he's back in against Celtic, looking nowhere near ready, and has never looked ready at any stage in the 2-3 months since. So, you know, does a really strong manager allow that to be the case? I'm not sure. I think Morelos is bombed out, even if it means you're having to rely on Robbie Ure as backup to Antonio Cholak until he proves himself ready. In fact, I think that's again one of the issues why Van Bronckhorst there. He's not dealt with a big issue in his dressing room. You know, the fact that a guy who's effectively your best player hasn't got himself in a condition or a mental space to contribute. So is somebody like Sean Dyche prepared to let that sort of stuff slide? I don't think he would be, but I think it has to be an overall package. You have to have a guy who's got the character, the persona, the gravitas to lead a dressing room like Rangers, but also have the footballing acumen, the style of play, the tactical nous to compete at home against Postecoglou, who's got his style of play embedded in this team so securely, and also in Europe.
Yeah, well, we know Ralph Hasenhüttl, who was sacked at Southampton recently, knows Ross Wilson well and spoke highly of him. And with somebody like that be on your radar, Andy, or what about Bielsa, another name that's been going around, Marcelo Gallardo at River Plate? These are all, but again, when you start getting into that territory, I suppose there's a little bit of a gamble. But then you mentioned Ange Postecoglou, people would have said that was a gamble, you know, and look how that's worked out. So, I mean, Bielsa, I suppose you're talking about money with somebody like Bielsa. I mean, you have to be, what's he going to be looking for a year?
Yeah, I mean, and it's a bit like Hasenhüttl as well. I'm not sure guys of his level that's worked in the Premier League for about 4 or 5 years are ready to come to Scotland. I think, you know, I'm just not sure of that. I wonder, I've seen like names like Tedesco, that was the Leipzig manager, Peter Bosz as well, sort of been linked. I think both of them, I'm pretty sure both of them are out of work at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, Peter Bosz would be certain. I mean, you look at his CV, or certainly the clubs.
Lyon and Leverkusen and
Dortmund, I think, as well. Yeah.
I mean, it's just Ajax, the European final as well.
I mean, on the basis that they've been to Ibrox, they've sampled that atmosphere at Ibrox, they've seen what it's like. I wonder if that might appeal to them, especially if they're out of work. You know, especially Bosz has bounced about a few jobs. You know, he's never really stuck it. Maybe he's looking for somewhere that he thinks he can stick down some more solid roots. Maybe Scotland might be the place he thinks he can survive longer. But yeah, I mean, I think those are the kind of names I think would excite punters. But it's whether or not Rangers can get them. I'm not sure about Hasenhüttl, and as much as I would love to see Bielsa up here causing havoc and putting spies outside Lennoxtown and things like that, having a drone flying above Lennoxtown. I'd love to see that, but yeah, I'm not sure that's going to come about.
That would be amazing. I think we should start a petition for that.
But that's the thing, Daniel. Although I said earlier on when you said he shocked him, saying, well, you know, I couldn't see him. I'm surprised that it took so long. You know, a week into the winter break, I thought it would have been quicker sooner after the St Mirren draw. But I mean, that week will have allowed them, even though the decision has been announced today, they'll have known, you know, for whatever reason the delay was, whether it was to do with compensation or whatever it is, they've had that week. They have to have been working away in the background. There's no doubt about it.
I think, I mean, I was, speaking to some people in Van Bronckhorst's camp over the last week. I mean, I think they were desperate to try and persuade the board to stick by him. So I think that's maybe been part of it, is that, you know, people near Gio have been trying to persuade the board to give him the time, and, you know, the board have perhaps listened to those arguments and have taken time to sort of weigh everything up. I mean, as much as, you know, boards can, you know, we're always guilty of it in the media. You sort of you demand knee-jerk reactions, and then when you get knee-jerk reactions, you accuse them of going too soon. You know, they've obviously taken their time to weigh up the decision, decide, you know, okay, he's been dealt a tough hand this year. He's had injuries. The recruitment hasn't gone well. You know, is it his fault? Is it Gio's fault? Or is it just gone too far now that the punters are just not wearing them anymore? They've obviously taken their time, but now they need to, this is it, you know, it's decision time. They need to get this next appointment right for their own sakes. And
one thing that's for sure, guys, with AGM coming up, it's definitely not going to be boring. It's going to be an interesting few weeks.
No, it's weird because we were certainly the one a year ago, and Van Bronckhorst was just in the door. I'm trying to think. I think he maybe had a couple of games, but it was I mean, it was so calm. It was like, I don't even think he was asked anything. He sat there the whole time as virtually a spectator. And the same even with the board. I mean, at that time, top of the league, there was just nothing really of any real controversial note.
It hasn't really been a lively AGM since the days of gazebos and tents in the pitch. The last few have been fairly calm. Even when there were things you thought they might kick off about. I mean, I remember, I think the one after maybe Caixinha's time in charge, and you were thinking this could get a bit tasty, but no, it's it's been fairly calm. I get the feeling this might be a bit different this time. I think there might be a wee bit more action.
But that is the thing, they make an appointment, Daniel, whenever next week, and things do change, and fans, of course, they will be having a go at the board, but if there's a new manager up there and they're happy with the appointment, a lot of the time as well, they can appease, fans. Sometimes you think it's going to be bigger, and it doesn't transpire, as Andy said. I've seen it over the years at many, both Rangers and Celtic AGMs, where you think, oh, that's it, it's going to be absolute hell on, and then it's not for whatever reason.
Yeah. Well, guys, I could talk to you all day about this. We could speculate into the wee hours, but I think that brings us to the end of today's Record Sport Facebook Live. Should say for everyone commenting, thanks for getting involved. You can find us also at Record Sport on Twitter and at Daily Record Sport on Instagram, and you can follow all of the latest reaction to Gio's sacking on dailyrecord.co.uk/sport. Guys, as ever, it's been a pleasure.
Cheers, Daniel.
Cheers, Gav.
And we'll be back next time. Cheers.
Cheers, Andy.